Ethan Carter, CEO of the famous fast food chain Carter's Grill, stood still in the parking lot of one of his branches, his eyes fixed on the glowing neon sign above the store. The sun had begun to set, its faint light reflecting off the glass facade of the building, giving the scene an unusual calmness, one that stood in stark contrast to the hustle and bustle inside. The sounds of car engines, drive-through orders crackling through the intercom, and the hurried footsteps of customers coming and going formed the background music to the business he had built from scratch. Under the soft yellow lights, the digits on his phone screen kept blinking. Real-time revenue updates from each location. On paper, everything looked great. Sales were steadily rising, the brand was expanding fast. Carter's Grill had reached 15 stores across the region and earned a loyal customer base. But for Ethan, all those numbers couldn't drown out the unease weighing heavily on his mind. He could feel something was off. He couldn't explain it, but the feeling was strong enough to stop him in his tracks. This wasn't a problem he faced back in the early days, when the company was small, manageable, and every detail was within his control. Back then, he was hands-on with everything, personally interacting with employees, talking to customers, and managing every part of the operation, from food production to customer service. Now, the company had grown too big. Board meetings, phone calls from regional managers, and financial reports had taken over his daily life. Still, a question kept echoing in his head. Do I really know what's going on inside my stores anymore? It had been over a year since he last stepped foot into any of his locations. The new employees running the day-to-day operations had never even seen his face, and he had never met them either. Surrounded by expansion plans and spreadsheets, he'd come to rely solely on data. Data that, he now realized, might be hiding the truth. That uneasy feeling felt like a warning sign, a reminder that no report, no chart, no plan on paper could replace real insight. He had built Carter's Grill from the ground up, pouring his heart and creativity into it. But had he lost touch with what truly mattered? Did he still understand what was happening at the front lines, where employees were under pressure from customers and managers alike? He knew he couldn't just look at revenue graphs, while ignoring the hidden cracks beneath the surface. Ethan took a deep breath, letting his body relax after moments of tension. He looked up at the building in front of him, the first Carter's Grill he had ever opened, the place where everything began. Memories of the early days came rushing back. But it was different now. The company had expanded too quickly, and problems he had never imagined were now right in front of him. Without hesitation, Ethan made a decision. He needed to understand what was really happening in his stores. He had to go out and see it with his own eyes. But this time, he wouldn't go as a CEO. He would walk into his restaurants as a regular customer, completely unrecognizable. He wanted to see how things truly operated when he wasn't being watched, when no one knew who he was. He got into his car. Instead of his usual tailored suit, he pulled on an old hoodie, put on a baseball cap, and let his beard grow out. He looked like just another ordinary guy. No one in the store would recognize him. That was the only way he could observe the truth, unfiltered and unaffected by his image. As he started the engine, Ethan felt a renewed sense of determination. He was going to uncover the truth behind the unease that had been bothering him for far too long. Ethan drove slowly down the busy street, his mind tangled in a storm of thoughts. Though Carter's Grill was thriving on the surface, its rapid growth had brought consequences that felt increasingly out of his control. New branches were popping up like mushrooms after the rain, but behind the layers of daily operations and middle management, a widening gap had formed, one that now separated Ethan from the reality on the ground. He hadn't set foot in any of his stores for over a year. Each morning, his world consisted of reports, meetings, and performance metrics. But numbers couldn't tell the full story. They couldn't capture the sighs of a tired employee, the frustration of an ignored customer, or the tension in a poorly managed shift. Ethan's thoughts drifted back to the early days, back when he could walk into a store and feel the energy, the excitement, the passion, the human connection with every team member. Now, his stores felt like soulless machines, run by efficiency charts and profit margins rather than values and people. He could no longer rely solely on regional managers or shift supervisors. Something deep inside him told him that unless he went in himself, he'd never truly understand what was going on. Complaints from customers, quiet frustrations shared by staff, these were just scattered puzzle pieces. And he knew he couldn't complete the picture unless he saw it with his own eyes. But how could he possibly identify the real problems from the lofty perspective of a CEO? How could he uncover the truth unless he experienced the store like a regular person? Ethan couldn't wait any longer. A decision had crystallized in his mind. He had to do something, and he had to do it now, before everything slipped further from his grasp. He needed to return, but not as Ethan Carter, the CAO. He needed to walk in as someone unrecognizable, a customer, someone anonymous, someone invisible, someone who would see the truth behind the polished image. The thought of going undercover had crossed his mind before. Now it became the plan. He would transform his appearance completely. Gone was the sharp-tailored suit, in its place an old hoodie he hadn't worn in years. He threw on a baseball cap, letting his unkempt hair and stubble obscure the last hints of familiarity. A plain look. Nothing flashy, nothing that would draw attention. He would walk in as just another face in the crowd. Only then could he see what really happened when no one was trying to impress the boss. Ethan pulled over and checked his phone for directions. He had already chosen the branch, one of the older stores located in the suburbs. Lately, he'd been hearing murmurs, complaints about rude staff, slow service, and careless order handling. Those whispers echoed in his mind now, louder than ever. A quiet restlessness stirred inside him. He didn't know what he'd find, but one thing was certain. He couldn't return to his office and keep pretending that spreadsheets told the whole story. He had to face reality, however uncomfortable it might be. As he stepped through the front doors, Ethan took a deep breath. His footsteps echoed across the cold tile floor, and with each step, he moved closer to the truth he'd been avoiding for too long. Whatever he was about to see, he was ready. As Ethan stepped through the glass doors, a cold gust from the air conditioner swept over him, carrying the familiar scent of fried chicken and crispy fries, the very aromas that had become the signature of Carter's grill. Yet the atmosphere inside was nothing like what he had pictured. To him, his stores had always represented energy, warmth, and a welcoming vibe. Places alive with enthusiasm and friendly service. But now, the store felt like a machine, cold, lifeless, as if the soul had been drained from it. Everything looked tired. Ethan scanned the wide space. The polished wooden tables were still there. The promotional posters still hung on the walls. But something had changed, the spirit of the place. Gone were the sounds of cheerful greetings, lively chatter, and team energy. Now, there was only the dull whir of the receipt printer and the faint sizzle of oil from the kitchen. The staff looked worn out, going through the motions like robots. Behind the counter stood a young woman, clearly exhausted, swiping half-heartedly across the touchscreen register without even glancing up as Ethan approached. Her name tag read Maria. She gave him a brief glance, then turned back to the screen and muttered in a drained, indifferent voice, "Hi there, you ordering something?" Ethan felt a twinge of disappointment. But it wasn't anger. Not at her. It didn't take long for him to see. This wasn't apathy. This was fatigue. Burnout. Mariah wasn't rude. She was simply surviving the shift. There was no enthusiasm in her eyes, no spark of connection, only the mechanical movement of someone trying to endure. And in that moment, Ethan realized the problem wasn't Maria. It was the system, the environment, the culture that had allowed things to decay. As she tapped through the menu, a loud voice suddenly tore through the quiet. "Maria, move it! You're slower than a turtle." Heavy footsteps pounded toward the front counter. Ethan turned around and saw a large man in a manager's uniform, storming over with a scowl carved deep into his face. He glared at Maria like she was a complete failure, and without hesitation barked loudly for everyone to hear. "Do you even know what you're doing? Keep this up and I'll have to fire you." Ethan felt a surge of anger rise in his chest. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. This wasn't just disrespect, it was humiliation. Public verbal abuse, in the middle of a store, in front of customers. Maria kept her head down. Her hands trembled as she returned the change to a customer, her eyes avoiding Ethan's entirely. There was a look of silent shame on her face, and it cut deep. Ethan didn't say a word. He just observed. Around them, customers were beginning to grow impatient. Some frowned, some whispered among themselves, but no one spoke up. The air in the store felt heavy, like a vacuum where accountability had vanished. Everyone simply tolerated the dysfunction in silence. Ethan looked around. Maria, he realized, was the only one working. She ran from the register to the tables, cleaning, serving food, trying to hold everything together on her own. Meanwhile, a group of employees stood idly in the corner, laughing, chatting, completely disengaged. They were the ones who were supposed to serve customers, yet none of them seemed to care. That apathy, that indifference, hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a store with bad service. This was a workplace with no leadership, no motivation, and no respect. This was the true problem. Not the numbers, not the expansion, but the culture. And it was failing. As he watched Maria hustle by herself while others watched and did nothing, Ethan felt his heart sink. This wasn't the dream he had built. He had once envisioned Carter's Grill as a place where every team member mattered, where people felt seen, respected, and driven to serve with pride. What he saw now was not the company he had founded. Ethan turned, sat down at a corner table, and quietly pulled out his phone. He began to type, note after note, capturing everything he had just witnessed. It was a painful realization, a brutal reminder of how far he had drifted from the front lines, and he knew, in that moment, this could not continue. He had to act. Now, before it was too late. Ethan stepped forward, quietly making his way to the order counter where Maria was still standing, her fingers tapping numbers on the register in a mechanical rhythm, her eyes glued to the screen. Even from a distance, he could see the exhaustion etched into her face, the dark circles under her eyes, the tight line of her lips, the way her posture slumped slightly forward, as if she were barely holding herself together through the weight of another long, draining shift. She didn't look like the kind of employee Ethan once trained. Those bright, eager faces ready to serve customers with enthusiasm and a smile. Maria seemed young, but the fatigue and resignation on her face made her look much older in spirit. Something was very wrong with this workplace. As Ethan approached, she barely glanced up. He gave a soft cough, trying to gently catch her attention. But Maria greeted him in the same tired tone she used earlier, without any spark or energy. "Hi, what can I get you?" Ethan didn't rush. He could tell instantly that Maria wasn't being rude. She was just burned out, buried beneath pressure and overlooked by the very system meant to support her. He offered a small, kind smile to ease the tension, then replied softly, "Hi there, I'll take a combo number 3. With the special sauce, please." Maria keyed the order into the register, but Ethan noticed her hands trembling slightly. Her movements lacked the fluidity and speed of an experienced cashier. She didn't meet his eyes. Her gaze remained down, as if avoiding connection was the only way she could make it through the shift. When the transaction was done, she handed him his change, her hands still shaking slightly, her timing just a bit off. She muttered, "$8.99. Ethan accepted the change, but the unease in his chest only deepened. Maria didn't lack skill, she lacked support, and what he saw was a person slowly being crushed under the weight of a toxic work environment. He stood still, watching her carefully, trying to absorb every detail. Then something shifted. A loud, aggressive voice cut through the air behind him, authoritative, rough, and laced with contempt. Ethan turned and saw Carl, the same manager he'd seen earlier, emerge from the back kitchen. Tall, broad, and radiating irritation, Carl walked with a swagger that made it clear he believed he owned the room. Carl didn't hide his anger. He locked eyes on Maria and barked, sharp and merciless. "Maria, You move slower than a damn turtle. Pick it up already." Maria flinched. Her face turned pale. She lowered her head immediately, trying to avoid Carl's glare and focus on her task. But he didn't stop. He stomped toward the counter, his voice rising with each step until even the quiet background noise of the store faded beneath his yelling. "Don't you see the line? Customers are waiting because of you. You don't deserve this job. I have no idea why the company still keeps you around." Maria said nothing. She just bowed her head further and rushed to complete another order, desperate to stay out of Carl's path. But Ethan felt like he'd just taken a punch to the gut. He couldn't believe a manager would speak to his employee like that, especially in public, in front of customers. Maria wasn't slacking off. She wasn't lazy. She was doing her best in a place where cruelty had replaced leadership and intimidation had replaced guidance. Ethan clenched his jaw, trying to hold down the anger building inside him. He walked slowly toward the counter and said softly to Maria, "Are you okay?" Maria barely nodded, her eyes still fixed downward. She turned away quickly, not wanting to linger. She didn't want conversation. She didn't want attention. She just wanted the day to end. Ethan stood in silence, watching. And in that silence, a new fire lit inside him. This wasn't the company he built. This wasn't the Carter's Grill he dreamed of. No strategy meeting or glowing sales report could cover up the rot he had just witnessed. And he knew now, with absolute clarity, if he didn't take action right now, nothing would ever change. Ethan remained standing, quietly watching the scene unfold before him. Though the anger and frustration inside him had started to swell, he forced himself to stay calm. In all his years as a CEO, he had witnessed his fair share of tense workplace situations. But never, never had he seen something as disturbing as this. And worst of all, it was happening inside one of his own stores. Carl, the store manager, continued berating Maria with a tone that was not only harsh but completely devoid of empathy. Every word he hurled at her felt like a knife to Ethan's chest. There was no respect in Carl's voice, no understanding, no leadership, just cruelty. And then Carl said something that Ethan would never forget. "I honestly don't even know why I still have to keep her around. She's slow, constantly making mistakes, and always looks like she's going to a funeral. But the company forces me to keep her because of those damn diversity quotas. I'm just trying to hit targets, man." Ethan froze. That sentence hit him like a lightning bolt. Not only was Carl belittling Maria as a person, but he had mocked one of the core principles Ethan had spent years building: diversity, fairness, and dignity. He had reduced a struggling, hard-working employee into a number on a corporate spreadsheet. He had turned Maria into a checkbox, and worst of all, he had done so without shame. Ethan felt his chest tighten. His heart pounded. This wasn't just a bad manager. This was a systemic rot, and Carl was the embodiment of everything that had gone wrong while Ethan had looked away. The values Ethan once poured into this company, respect, fairness, human dignity, were being torn apart. Not by competitors, not by market conditions, but by people like Carl, from the inside. He couldn't remain silent anymore. He took a deep breath, stepped forward, and locked eyes with Carl. His voice was calm, but his words were edged with steel. "You think Maria is just a number on a diversity report?" Ethan's tone was firm, each word deliberate. "This company was built on the foundation of respect and fairness. If you see her as nothing more than a quota, you're not just failing her, you're damaging this entire company." Carl stared at him, confused at first. Clearly, he hadn't expected a random customer, especially one dressed in a hoodie, to confront him like this. But then his arrogance returned. He gave a shrug, smirked, and said, "Look, buddy, I don't know who you are, but I'm just doing my job. This isn't an easy gig. She's not performing, and corporate says I have to keep her. I'm not the bad guy here." Ethan didn't blink. He looked straight into Carl's eyes and spoke with unwavering conviction. "This isn't your job, Carl. What you're doing now, this is abuse of power. You're not managing people, you're breaking them. and that's something I will never tolerate. Carl blinked. There was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes now, but Ethan wasn't done. He wasn't just speaking for Maria. He was speaking for every employee who had suffered in silence, for every principle that had been ignored, for the Carter's Grill he once believed in. Ethan stepped back slowly, letting Carl sit with those words. But inside, he was no longer the man who had walked into the store quietly and anonymously. He was the man who had seen the truth and could never unsee it. And now, he would act. Because this wasn't just a management issue. This was a moral crisis. And Ethan Carter would not let Carter's Grill fall apart from the inside. Ethan didn't leave the store immediately. He stood still, eyes quietly scanning the room, unwilling to turn his back just yet. Yes, he had confronted Carl, but deep down he knew the problem ran deeper than a single toxic manager. What he saw now was something far more insidious, a culture of apathy spreading like a disease, infecting the entire store. And that realization hit him harder than anything else. Maria was still at the order counter, moving diligently between tasks, wiping down tables, handing out food, and even stepping outside the kitchen from time to check on delayed orders. She worked with quiet patience and a kind of resilience that Ethan found both admirable and heartbreaking. Her movements were brisk but not frantic, like someone simply trying to survive each minute of her shift, without encouragement, without recognition, and completely on her own. And as Ethan looked around more closely, the truth became impossible to ignore. Maria was the only one actually working. A group of employees huddled near the back, laughing loudly, some with their phones out, scrolling through social media like they were on a break that never ended. One girl, still in Carter's Grill uniform, leaned against a wall, legs crossed, gazing out the window with a blank stare, checked out from reality. Others stood near the kitchen, chatting about movies, joking loudly, never once glancing at the customers waiting for their food. Ethan couldn't believe what he was seeing. This wasn't laziness, it was disrespect. Toward the job, the customers, and their own colleagues. Nearby, a couple of customers were starting to show visible irritation. An elderly man with stark white hair frowned as he looked down at his burger. He didn't say a word, but the expression was enough. Across the room, other customers quietly gathered their things and left, unnoticed by anyone on staff. Their silence spoke volumes. Ethan turned his eyes back to Maria. She was still moving, still helping, still serving, still cleaning. The tray in her hands trembled slightly as she rushed another order to a waiting customer. She never complained, but her eyes, the lines forming at the corners, the tension in her brow and the tight press of her lips, they told the truth. She wasn't fighting customers or orders. She was fighting an invisible machine, one built from neglect, indifference, and a total lack of support. Ethan felt disappointment rise like a tide inside him. He had once dreamed of building a company where everyone felt valued, a workplace where every person believed they were part of something meaningful. But now, it was clear things weren't just broken. They were collapsing from within. These weren't just bad employees. They were people who had been allowed to stop caring. And no one had stepped in, no one had lifted a finger to help. How could a team like this deliver service worth anything? How could a company survive when no one took responsibility? Then he saw Maria again, this time facing a particularly upset customer. The man was visibly irritated about the delay in receiving his food, and though it wasn't her fault, Maria still bowed her head and said quietly, "I'm really sorry for the delay. Your order will be right out." Her apology was soft, genuine. It didn't erase the customer's frustration, but it said everything about who Maria was. In that small act of grace, she did what no one else here was doing. She took ownership. She cared. And that made her stand out even more against the backdrop of silence, neglect, and passive disinterest from the rest of the team. Maria was carrying the weight of the entire store on her own. Ethan looked around once more. It became clear this wasn't just Maria's problem. She wasn't the only person capable. But she was the only one stuck in a system where no one else cared. And she was drowning. No employee, no human being should have to endure that. If he didn't act now, this wouldn't just continue, it would spread. It would destroy everything Carter's Grill stood for, and worst of all, It would break people like Maria, the very people the company should be protecting. Ethan took a deep breath, eyes still locked on Maria as she moved quietly from table to table. The decision was clear. It was time to rebuild, from the inside out. He couldn't delay any longer. Ethan remained seated in the corner, but this time he was no longer just observing. The disappointment inside him had evolved into a slow-burning rage, something he couldn't shake off. He couldn't sit still while everything unraveled before his eyes. This scene, the store, the people, the energy, it was nothing like the vision he had poured his heart into. Carter's Grill, the company he had founded with passion and purpose, had become a place steeped in neglect and injustice. Then, a sudden noise shattered the uneasy quiet. Clatter! A metal tray hit the floor with a loud crash. Ethan looked up and saw Maria frozen in place. The tray she had been carrying had slipped from her hands, scattering food across the floor. All eyes turned toward her. She stood motionless, her expression stunned, as if she were caught in the middle of a nightmare. Almost immediately, the heavy thud of footsteps approached. Carl. The manager stormed out from the back, his face twisted with irritation, his tone already laced with disdain. "What the hell are you doing?" he barked. "Seriously? You have one job, and you can't even do that right? Are you even a real employee?" Maria didn't move. Her hands trembled, but she didn't dare kneel down or speak. Her eyes were wide, blank, and exhausted. Ethan could see it clearly. This wasn't just about a dropped tray. This was about someone completely broken down by the system around her. Carl stepped closer, now towering over her, shouting in front of everyone. "There are plenty of people more qualified than you, but no, corporate makes me keep you for their little diversity initiative. If it weren't for that, I'd have fired you a long time ago." Maria's head dropped. She didn't flinch, didn't protest. To her, these words were just part of the daily battle, a battle she could never win. Ethan felt heat rising through his chest. His blood boiled. He had once built this company to be a place of dignity and opportunity, a place where people were lifted up, not torn down. And now, here it was, a manager openly humiliating an employee in public, turning her into a target, a scapegoat, a statistic. And no one, no colleague, no supervisor stood up for her. Ethan couldn't take it anymore. Every second that passed only deepened his resolve. He stood up, walked swiftly toward the counter, and before Carl could spit out another word, Ethan raised his voice. "That's enough." His tone was sharp, commanding. Carl froze. "Who the hell are you to speak to me like that?" he asked. Ethan didn't let him finish. "That's enough, Carl. I'm the CEO of Carter's Grill, and I will not stand by while you treat an employee like that." Carl's jaw dropped. His face flushed red with disbelief. "You are unfit to manage this store. As of now, you're terminated." Carl stumbled back slightly, mouth open. He tried to speak, but Ethan cut him off. "Maria didn't fail this store. You did. She dropped that tray because she's been running this place on her own while the rest of you stood around doing nothing. You didn't just mistreat her. You disrespected this entire company. I will not allow that." Then Ethan turned to Maria. She still stood there, trembling, but not from fear. Something had shifted in her eyes. Relief. For the first time in months, someone had seen her. Someone had stood up for her. Ethan offered her a gentle smile. Then he turned back to Carl and with one final, unshakable voice, said, "Thank you for your time, but we're done here." He looked at Maria again, softly adding, "Thank you for enduring. That ends today." And in that moment, Ethan knew this was just the beginning of the change. Not just for Maria, but for every employee who had been ignored, dismissed, and forgotten. Ethan felt the anger rise inside him like a fire that could no longer be contained. He stood there, watching Carl still at the front of the store, his face a mix of surprise and defiance. Every word Carl had just spoken about Maria, every ounce of disrespect and dehumanization, every time he reduced her to a line on a diversity report, they were all deep wounds to everything Ethan believed in. He started walking. Each step forward was firm, full of purpose, Not for some grand display, not for applause, but because of something far more important: integrity. He couldn't let people like Carl poison his company. He couldn't allow someone so unfit to lead to continue breeding a toxic environment. Ethan stopped right in front of Carl, his eyes locked onto Carl's, sharp and unwavering. Carl stared back, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face, but his pride still clung on, like a mask slipping out of place. "Explain yourself, Carl," Ethan said, his voice steady and commanding. "Why did you treat Maria that way? What did she do to deserve being talked to like she's nothing? What gives you the right to speak to an employee like that? Right here, in front of customers, in front of the team." Carl straightened up, disbelief flashing across his face. He stammered, searching for words, then tried to reclaim his confidence, though it rang hollow now. "Who do you think you are to come in here and judge me?" Carl replied with a scoff. "I'm doing my job. I'm managing a team. Maria is a bad employee. If I don't push her, this place falls apart." Ethan clenched his jaw. The excuses were pathetic. Carl wasn't trying to manage, he was trying to dominate. He wasn't guiding his staff, he was crushing them. "Do you not see the damage you're doing?" Ethan asked, voice rising slightly, still calm but fueled by emotion. "You think you're doing your job? Carl, you're destroying your team. You're not helping them improve. You're tearing them down. You think that title gives you power to abuse people? You're wrong, and you won't get away with it anymore." Carl's expression shifted, cocky confidence turning into raw frustration. "You don't understand," Carl snapped, his voice cracking slightly. "You don't know what I deal with every day. Everything falls on me. I'm the one holding this place together. You're just a CO in an office. You don't get it." That line hit Ethan like a slap, not because of the insult, but because of the complete lack of self-awareness. Carl didn't see the real problem. He didn't see that the issue wasn't Maria or the job or even the pressure. It was him. His leadership, his actions, his toxic influence. This wasn't just about Carl. It was about culture. And Ethan had allowed that culture to rot while he was away. He couldn't hold back any longer. "That's enough, Carl," Ethan said, his voice firm, final. "You don't have the right to lead this store any longer. As of today." Carl froze. His eyes widened. His jaw dropped in disbelief. He opened his mouth to argue, but Ethan cut him off with a single step forward, a stare that left no room for negotiation. "You didn't just fail at your job, Carl. You failed this company. You failed your team. You showed no responsibility, no empathy, and no respect. You thought you had power, but let me be clear, that power is gone." Carl stood speechless, face flushed red, a man suddenly aware of the consequences he could no longer dodge. Ethan turned away from him, no longer interested in explanations or excuses. But before walking off, he looked to Maria, still by the counter, her hands trembling slightly, her eyes unsure if what just happened was real. "Maria," Ethan said softly, his tone changing, gentle but firm. "You don't deserve what happened to you today. You don't deserve what you've been enduring for weeks, and from now on that changes. I promise you, it changes." Maria looked at him, her eyes flickering with something fragile. Hope. There was still doubt, still a wall built from months of pain and silence, but in that moment, something shifted. Ethan offered her a quiet smile, and then he turned, walking away. Not with hesitation, but with a renewed fire in his heart. He had seen the truth, he had faced it, and now he would fix it. From the inside out. Starting today, Ethan woke up early the next morning, a fire of determination burning inside him. He knew what happened yesterday was just the beginning, a surface scratch on something far deeper. Firing Carl had been necessary, but what Carl represented, that was the real problem. The culture, the system, the rot. If Ethan wanted real change, he had to understand it, from the inside out. Today, he wouldn't return as a CEO, and he wouldn't just walk in as a regular customer either. He would go in undercover, unrecognizable, unnoticed, unfiltered. He changed out of his usual tailored suit, the one that had long become a symbol of authority, and slipped into a plain delivery uniform. A blue polo shirt, a worn baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, a large thermal delivery bag slung across his back. The transformation was complete. No longer the face of Carter's Grill, just another face in the crowd, a delivery guy. Invisible to most. As Ethan walked back into the store, the atmosphere struck him immediately. No curious glances, no polite greetings, just the same cold, lifeless air he'd felt the day before. Nothing had changed. He scanned the room. The tired faces, the faded posters, the ever-present sound of frying oil. But still, no spark, no energy, no pride. And then he saw something that made his chest tighten. Carl. Still there, still working. The man he had fired just yesterday was still running the store. Standing in the kitchen, barking orders, loud, arrogant, as if nothing had happened. Kevin, watch it. Don't drop that crate. You break it, I cut your hours. Carl's voice rang out, sharp and aggressive. Kevin, a scrawny, timid teen, maybe 16, lowered his head and didn't say a word, just obeyed. Silently. That look in Kevin's eyes. Ethan had seen it before, yesterday, in Maria. The fear, the silence, the defeat. Carl hadn't changed. He hadn't left. And no one had made sure he did. Ethan felt rage boiling inside him. He moved quietly past the kitchen, continuing his observations. A few employees huddled in a corner, chatting casually about movies. One leaned against the counter, scrolling through her phone. Others loitered behind the line, pretending to work while doing nothing at all. And then, Maria. Still working, still moving, still the only one actually doing anything. She darted from counter to table to back room, carrying trays, wiping tables, delivering meals, but Ethan could see it in her face. The exhaustion was deeper now. She didn't smile anymore. She didn't carry the same resilience she had the day before. Now she looked like someone simply surviving, not driven by passion, not fueled by purpose, but stuck, tired, numb. Ethan felt it all settle in his chest like a stone. The dysfunction hadn't gone away. It had just settled into the cracks and kept growing. Apathy, disrespect, toxic management. It wasn't isolated, it was systemic. Carl continued to shout at his staff. Every mistake was met with threats, not guidance. Every correction came with humiliation, not help. This was emotional abuse, dressed up as management. Kevin flinched with every order. Mariah worked harder, saying nothing. The others just stood around and watched. This was not a broken store. It was a broken culture. Ethan knew he couldn't watch any longer. He turned and made his way toward the counter, not to pick up an order, not to make a delivery, but to take back his company. A plan was already forming in his mind, clear, direct, and long overdue. This wouldn't be a conversation. This would be action. And this time, there would be no turning back. Ethan stood quietly in the corner of the store, watching everything unfold. He knew he couldn't see every dark corner of his company from the perspective of a customer or a delivery driver, but what he had seen here was enough to paint a painfully clear picture. Carter's Grill was in trouble. Neglect, apathy, abuse. It was everywhere, but nothing hurt more than seeing Maria, the one person who actually cared, still working endlessly, still unacknowledged, still alone. Ethan watched as she rushed behind the order counter to grab a tray for another customer. Her hands moved quickly, but her body language was weighed down by fatigue. He couldn't stay silent anymore. He began walking slowly toward the front, past a group of employees who stood idly in the kitchen, chatting, laughing, doing nothing. Maria was wiping a table while balancing a tray in one hand. Her fingers trembled slightly. Her pace was rushed, yet controlled, like someone running on empty, but too proud to stop. Ethan approached the counter carefully, not wanting to alarm her. When Maria saw him from a distance, she gave a polite smile. Not the kind that came from joy, but the kind that was trained, worn, almost automatic. He stood silently for a moment, simply observing her. She never stopped, moving from one table to the next, always busy, never complaining. But her eyes told a different story. The dark circles, the creases in her brow, the tired press of her lips. She was running out of strength. Ethan stepped a little closer. Still gentle, still quiet. Finally, he spoke in a low voice, careful not to draw attention. "Maria, I've been watching you work all morning. You haven't taken a break. Are you okay?" Maria paused. Surprised, maybe. She glanced at him briefly, unsure why a random delivery guy would care, then gave a weak smile. "Oh, I'm fine, thanks." She turned back to her work, eager to move on. But Ethan didn't let her go so easily. He softened his tone, kept his voice low. "You work really hard. I can see it. I just wanted to check in, because it seems like there's a lot of pressure here." Maria hesitated. She looked around, checked to see if anyone was watching. Then she let out a quiet sigh. A long pause followed, and when she finally spoke, her voice was gentle. "Worn down. Thank you, but it's not easy here. It's not that I don't want to work hard, it's just no one really cares. Carl, he yells at us all the time. No one can ever do enough to please him. And the others? They just do their job to get through the shift. No one helps each other. No one tries." She stopped, like those few sentences had already taken too much energy. But Ethan didn't speak. He let the silence stretch, a space for her to keep going. Maria looked him in the eye this time. Her voice dropped, soft and cracked, as if holding back tears. "Some days I just want to quit, but I think about my family. I need this job. Even if I'm treated like this, even if no one helps me. It feels like no one notices unless I do everything perfectly." Ethan felt a deep ache rise in his chest. He knew. Maria wasn't alone. There were probably countless others just like her in the company. Hard-working, loyal, but slowly being crushed by a system that had forgotten them. He stepped closer, not to press further, but to stand with her. "Maria," he said softly, voice full of quiet resolve. "I know you've been carrying more than you should, and I want you to know I see it, I hear you, and I promise I'm going to help. You don't deserve this. No one in this company does. And I won't let this continue." Maria looked up, surprised. For a moment, she didn't avoid his gaze. There was something flickering in her eyes. Hope, but it was faint, fragile, still guarded. "Thank you," she said quietly. "But can things really change? I don't know anymore." Ethan smiled, not with optimism, but with conviction. "You'll see, Maria. Big changes are coming, and I'll make sure you're not just working harder, but that you feel valued. You matter. This job should never take that away from you." Maria looked at him, and for the first time in what seemed like forever, her smile wasn't just a reflex. It was real. Still cautious, still small, but real. Ethan knew this was only the beginning. The first step in something bigger than Carl, bigger than this store. A shift in everything Carter's Grill had become. And this time, his words weren't promises. They were action. Change was coming, and it started right here. Ethan could wait no longer. After everything he had seen in the past 2 days, he knew it was time to act, decisively. What was happening in this store wasn't just about a few bad apples or temporary mistakes. It was a symptom of a deeper rot, one that had eaten into the very bones of Carter's Grill, and now it had to end. For Maria, for every employee, for the future of the company he had built with his own hands. He stepped out from the corner where he had been watching, into full view of everyone in the store. A hush fell over the room. The chatter stopped. Kitchen workers, servers, even customers turned their heads, sensing something was about to happen. Ethan walked straight toward Carl, still standing by the counter. His smugness had faded, replaced by a flicker of unease, but Carl still held himself with false pride, as if unaware that the ground beneath him was about to crumble. Ethan didn't hesitate. "Carl," he said, his voice firm and clear, "today is your last day at Carter's Grill. You will not be working here anymore. Carl blinked. The surprise washed over his face in an instant. What are you doing? You can't just walk in here and, I'm the manager, he protested, his voice cracking as he tried to regain control. But Ethan didn't flinch. He looked Carl in the eye, unwavering. You are not a manager, he said calmly. Not anymore. You've disrespected your team, embarrassed this company, and destroyed the trust of those around you. You're being terminated immediately. Carl stood frozen. His mouth opened and closed, unable to find the words. He looked around, searching for support, but found none. The employees, the same people he once intimidated, were now watching in silence, no longer afraid. There was no more power in his voice, no more fear in their eyes. Ethan turned, addressing the entire team. You may think this decision is sudden, he said, raising his voice so all could hear. But the truth is, it should have been made long ago. This is the first step in a complete transformation of how we lead and operate. This company should not just be a place to earn a paycheck. It should be a place where you feel valued, respected, and treated like human beings. There was silence. But it wasn't cold. It was expectant. Hopeful. Maria stood behind the counter, watching, eyes wide. There was gratitude in her face. But also uncertainty. Ethan continued. Starting today, we'll begin a full review and retraining process. Every employee at every level will receive new guidance on professional conduct, team support, and mutual respect. We will not tolerate abuse. We will not reward indifference. We will rebuild this culture together. Then he turned to Maria, and this time his tone softened with warmth and pride. Maria, he said, your work ethic, your patience, your heart have not gone unnoticed. As of today, you are being promoted to shift supervisor, and I will personally make sure you have the tools and support you need to thrive in that role. Maria stood stunned, her mouth parted slightly, and for a moment it looked as though she couldn't believe what she had just heard. Then, softly, her voice came. Thank you. I don't know what to say, just thank you for seeing me. Ethan smiled, his voice now quieter, but no less resolute. You earned it. And all of you, you deserve better. This is the first step. I'll be with you as we turn this company around. Together. The room began to shift. The energy changed. Employees looked at one another with new eyes. Walls that had long stood between them, fear, doubt, silence, began to crack. A spark of something real passed through the air. Hope. Ethan turned and walked out of the store, a quiet satisfaction in his chest. But he knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The road ahead would be long. There would be resistance. But today he had taken the first step. He had exposed the rot and started a new era for Carter's Grill. If you've been captivated by the stories and insights shared here at Deep Inside HQ, now is the perfect time to become a part of this journey. Subscribe to our channel and join a community that values transparency, empathy, and the power of truth. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. And be sure to share your thoughts with us in the comments. We love hearing from you. Together, let's explore the depths of real stories, uncover hidden truths, and create a space for change. Don't just watch, be a part of the conversation. Join us at Deep Inside HQ, where we get to the heart of the matter.